as you're getting ready for your interview, we have many things that we need to talk about. You're going to have to think about your interview in advance as well as conduct your interview well. So let's talk about what you're going to be doing. First of all, you are going to have to think about whether or not you're going to tape record your interview. There are pros and cons to both. Pros, you get the exact wording of the person whom you're interviewing. It gives you some protection so they can't say that you misquoted them. It also offers some sound bites in case you want to insert some of the comments online. Cons, well, a lot of times, frankly, tape recorders don't work. It's annoying, but that's just the way that it is. I've had this happen before, and you think you have the entire interview and none of it's recorded, and it's horrible. Sometimes tape recorders inhibit your sources. They don't want to talk because they're self-conscious. Another con is you don't take notes, and if you don't take notes, then you're relying that your tape recorder had better work. And something that occurs to you on the spot might not be something that occurs to you later when you hear the discussion again. And you have no nonverbal cues on the tape recorder, so obviously you can't remember if somebody was making a funny face when they said something. For taking notes for interviews, there's a couple things that I want you to think about doing. One is that you need to practice ahead of time. It's not just something you go into right away. Grab a roommate, a friend, a parent, and just practice taking notes of what they're saying. Focus now on the interview. So when you're interviewing, focus on right now, what is happening that moment, the exact time that the person is talking. Don't think about what you want to ask them in 10 seconds. Don't think about lunch. Think about the now question. You need to be quiet as much as possible. Do not talk. If you don't need to talk, don't talk. Be open-minded. Don't cut somebody off if you're skeptical, but make a note and maybe you can get back to it later. Learn to take some notes with symbols. So if you star something, that might mean it's important. And I have all sorts of little things that I use, things that are going to come up a lot. I'll use initials, acronyms. I use medical symbols sometimes, just things that make it easy for me. I save notes for 1 to 2 years. That's my rule. After 2 years, I think you're fairly safe with getting rid of it, but some people would say you should need it for much longer. And if you do take a recording, you really don't need to transcribe it unless you have to. And so let's say you want an exact quote. Well, you know what? Just go ahead and transcribe that one section. You don't need to transcribe a whole 10-minute interview where you type out exactly what was said. Still, as you're planning the interview, you need to research the background of the person whom you're interviewing. You can't just let everything be discovered while you're in the interview. So make sure that you already know some things so you can ask informed questions. Oh, went too fast. Identify your goals. What do you want out of this interview? And you need to ask these questions. There is the goal method that was written about by LaRue W. Gilliland, who's an educator, and he talked about that you should always have a goal. You should always have your goals. Think of obstacles, achievements, and the logistics of the person with whom you're interviewing. For instance, G is for goals, so we ask questions like, what are your goals? What were your goals? What would you like to accomplish? Things like that. O is for obstacles. What were the obstacles you've had? And ask for example stories, and try not to ask them to be really specific, like, what's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you? Just ask for stories. A is for achievements. What have you accomplished, and what do you hope to accomplish? L is for logistics. This is get some of those boring details. How did you become involved in the organization? How did Lee University prepare you to work with people? Things like that. If you are planning all of these questions and you do it in advance, then you're going to be ready for your interview. And it's okay to rephrase questions to slightly different wording. That's fine. So now you guys need to get to work on the interview questions you're going to ask your people. planning for the interview. We have just finished part 1, and so now this is part 2. You've been planning your questions in advance, and you are ready to be thinking about that interview and actually get it set up now. You need to request the interview from your subject, but sometimes the interview can be a little bit threatening, so you can call it a conversation or a chat. Say, hey, can we get together and chat about this? Be ready to contact your interview subject multiple times. Nobody ever responds the first time when you ask for an interview, so be ready to sometimes spend weeks waiting for somebody to get back to you. Use many different means to contact them. Call them, email them, text them, snail mail. Don't give up. Now, when you are conducting the interview, you're actually sitting with your person interviewing them, you are going to want a mix of open-ended as well as closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions, there's only a limited amount of responses that they're going to give you. So if you ask, who inspired you? They're going to give you one person in particular, probably. What is your job description? You know what, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. These are just very specific questions. Open-ended questions are ones that they can take in a lot of different directions. And I like to have a fair amount of open-ended questions because it's kind of fun to see what can develop. Before you're in that interview, put those questions in order, kind of deal with them one at a time as you're going through the interview. Try not to be thinking of most of your questions on the spot. You also want to give the source, your interview source, an overview of what you're going to be talking about during the interview. Say, yeah, I'm writing an article for the Lead Go blog. This is what we do. This is what I'd like from you. It kind of sets them at ease as you're beginning to talk. I think when you're conducting the interview, it is good to do an icebreaker. You're going to be speaking with former Lee students, so you know what, let's shake their hand and, hey, how you doing? You know, where did you live? Who was your favorite teacher? You know, just kind of have some fun. Then ask some non-threatening questions at first. Always ask your basics towards the beginning. You can ask follow-up questions, and if you have any tough questions, then they are saved till the end. Now, I don't know if you'll actually have tough questions here, but, you know, if you do, just save them to the end. I think we said this, but put your questions in order, deal with them one at a time. Now, Pat Stith, who used to work with the Raleigh News and Observer, these were her favorite questions. She would say the why. What makes you say that? How do you know? How am I going to explain that to people in Cleveland, Tennessee? Another is like, explain this to me as if I'm a third grader, to get real basic questions. Now, it's kind of nice when you're interviewing to play the blame game. And this simply means that you blame somebody else that you have to be doing this interview. You're not doing this interview because you're obsessed or fascinated by your subject. You know what? That you've been sent there to ask these questions and to investigate because of the class that you're in. Now, you find it fascinating, but Doc Mo is going to make you get all the answers to your questions. So if you feel like you're kind of prying a little bit, it's nice to be able to blame me. Have emotional tact. Sympathize with your interview subject. Oh, that must have been horrible. But don't put yourself in there. Oh, I understand how you felt after your parents died. I felt that same way when my goldfish died. Yeah, don't do that. Periodically, rephrase the statements that your interview subject has said to make sure you understand that person, because sometimes you have misunderstood them. Also, sometimes your subject gives this long, multi-layered answer, and you kind of say, okay, yeah, that's really interesting, great. What is the most important of these? It's nice if you can ask if they know somebody else you can interview, another Lee student who has gone on to do service. See if they can kind of matchmake you with some more interviews. I like to end interviews with a free choice. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this? Telephone interviews are a little bit of their own beast, but you know what? We are going to get to telephone interviews in the next video. So, bye-bye for now. Now, this is part 3 of Getting the Story, interviewing, part 3. For telephone interviews, There are a few things that you're going to do differently than if you had an in-person interview. I don't really do icebreakers beyond identifying yourself and your affiliation. Hey, I'm Megan Moe, and I'm a professor at Lee University. Let them know I'm working on the Lee Go blog, but I don't really get into a lot more than that. Keep your questions fairly short. One sentence is great. 2 sentences is a maximum for a telephone interview. You can clarify after your subject answers, rephrase, making sure that you understand. Be sure to ask for details and examples. Sometimes people don't get into stories quite as quickly as they do face-to-face, so ask for that. Sometimes you need to ask people to put a chronology together for you. People often talk topically, so if they're going to talk about themselves, they might talk about the time when they are in another country, and they talk about all that, and then 10 minutes later they talk about when they were a student at Lee. Obviously the chronology's off because Lee happened before the other country, so you just got to make sure that you understand. And even though you're on the phone, make sure that you're verifying, getting when people's name, how they're spelled, and what their titles are. Make sure that you get that correct. Now for email interviews. You know what, these aren't so great, but sometimes it's all we have to work with. Limit your questions. Just pick your best questions because otherwise they're probably going to ignore you and not answer any. Make sure that your purpose is there right up front. Hey, I'm Megan Moe. I'm working with the Lee Go blog. We hear you're doing fantastic things, and I want to be able to share this with students on our blog. Again, verify names and titles, and whether or not you can include their personal and family details, because sometimes people want that, sometimes they don't. And limit how many follow-up emails you do. Give at least one follow-up email, but after that, you know what, don't keep bugging them. Now, you also should be thinking graphically. What can you add to create some kind of visual interest? Are there photos that you can ask them to give you? Are there websites that you could link to the blog, videos, statistics, pull quotes? Pull quote is simply a quote that your person has said, and you're going to pull it out and you're going to make it a much larger font than everything else and kind of offset it so it's interesting to look at. Free choice, this is again where we're just saying, is there anything else that you want to say before we end this conversation? I think it's that perfect way to end most every type of situation. So what we have here is all 3 parts of the getting the story and preparing for the interview. So now all of you are going to be preparing for some interviews. At least most of you are going to be preparing for interviews. Some of you might be doing a different job for the blog, but for those of you who are getting ready for your interview, now's the time. Do some research, get your questions figured out, set up your interviews, and get going. Thanks. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.